Hi, this is Music Woman from the Letterboxing capital of the United States, Connecticut, and this is the Letterboxing podcast.
You slip your headphones on, I'll be your radio, and if you turn me on.
Welcome to Letterpod episode number 2. In this episode, Music Woman will tell us about her trip to Dartmoor, and we have an interview with the LazyLetterboxer.
A trip to Dartmoor is a wonderful experience. There's nothing like the beauty and vastness of it. It is said that Dartmoor is an enchanting place with its intriguing and fascinating rock formations, colorful vegetation, and fairly tame animals. It was a place that you can fall in love with on your first glimpse. My first glimpse was in August of 2004. Deb, also known as Bluebird, and I headed west from Heathrow after flying in the day before and spending an overnight in Notting Hill. Deb insisted that I drive, since she always makes me drive in places that stress her out too much, and driving on the left definitely was stressful. Our first stop was Morton Hampstead in the northeast part of Dartmoor. Of course, we wanted our first stamp. As letterboxers, we all know that we're always looking for our first stamp. I had done some homework and found a website that gave me pub and stores with letterboxes in them. Since Morton Hampstead seemed to have a few boxes, we decided to head in that direction. We went into the information center and met a very nice guy, George. He gave us our first stamp. It was very exciting. The stamps in Dartmoor are very different than ours in the States. They're hand-produced on a computer, then sent away to be made. They don't carve their own stamps. We left Morton Hampstead towards Warren House, and the landscape really started to open up. Up until this point, we saw a lot of tall, old stone walls, but really could not see beyond them. We stopped at a turn-off on the right to find a herd of Dartmoor ponies. They were fairly tame and allowed us to get within about 10 feet of them, which was very surprising. After leaving the ponies, we stopped for our first cross. Dartmoor is littered with crosses marking graves from hundreds of years ago. They're all very well aged and absolutely beautiful. I couldn't help but take a picture. The cross had a background of subdued purple heather and yellow gorse splashed onto the green carpet of the moor, with stone wall circles and sheep on the far hillside breaking up the color. Paths are carved through the heather miles long to tours and other popular areas. As we drove on, we arrived at Warren House for our second stamp of the day. Soon we arrived at Princetown and our accommodation for the next 5 nights. We were staying at the Plume of Feathers, which is where Letterboxer 2002 stayed during his trip to the moors. We were staying in the Hiker's Hostel, which is not nearly to Deb's standards, but it suited me just fine. Sorry, Deb, I just had to say it. We were fortunate to have the 2-bunk room, which meant we didn't have roommates, which pleased us tremendously. Since we were in the bunkhouse, we had to supply our own sleeping bags, pillows, and towels, which we brought along in that great invention called a space bag. Thankfully, when we left, the inn just happened to have a canister bag, so we could get all our stuff back in our suitcases. We decided to walk around town to some of the other pubs and got 4 more stamps, and even saw Letterboxer 2002 in the books. We went back to the Plume for dinner and met up with Dartmoor Chris. He made quite an impression. As a former paratrooper, he comes off as a typical military guy, tattoos and lots of stories. However, Chris's stories weren't all from the military, but many were of life on the moor, tin mining, etc. The next morning we met up with Chris at the Plume and drove out to Okehampton to find our first box of the day, Cranmere Pool. We started our hike at Outpost 15, which is a very windy and barren area, with only some rocks, tall grass, and peat bogs. It's always very important to figure out what a peat bog is. Some are only a couple of inches thick, but some can be waist high. I'm sure there's nothing like falling into a waist-high bog of yucky water. We met up with Oakington Pool, a lake of small proportions with a triangular rock in the middle. We found 2 boxes here, which there should have been 40. It's very difficult to find boxes in peat banks. It just so happens that Chris has a golf club with a club portion sawed off and a long nail in its place. It allowed him to poke down into the peat banks to find the boxes. We found that boxes had a tendency to be grown over with grass. In Dartmoor, many boxes are actually hidden in the ground with a tuft of grass on top. In less wet areas, the grass usually dies, so it's easier to find the box. However, in wet, boggy areas, the grass grows on top of the box, which makes the box virtually impossible to find without some poking apparatus. And my EMS hiking stick definitely was not doing the trick. The hike to Cranmere Pool was an easy stroll, even in the blazing sun due to the gusts of wind on the moor. Every once in a while, we would have to circumvent a peat bog, which I got really good at identifying. When we got to Cranmere Pool, we noticed that the pool was merely a small puddle in the middle of a grassy area. As we stamped in, 3 more hikers came to the Cranmere Pool box. Francis, Lynn, and Phil were letterboxers and were excited to exchange with 2 people from the States. As we exchanged our stamps, personal travelers, and Alifair's 150th anniversary letterbox, at least 6 more hikers, none of them were letterboxers though, hiked by and signed into the Cranmere logbook. One person was even celebrating his 50th year of hiking to Cranmere Pool. From Cranmere Pool, we headed out to Taw Head and then started back to the car. We found a memorial stone for the poet Ted Hughes. Ted Hughes lived near Dartmoor and passed away just a few years ago. We trekked back to the car. Chris had us leaving the moor in a different way and brought us to a place where the road was slightly washed out. I was a little worried about driving through as I didn't know how deep it was, so Chris pulled my car through for me. It was hilarious, since he had never driven an automatic before and mistook the brake for the clutch. Debbie and I continued on towards Princetown, finding pubs and pub letterboxes along the way. We went into a pub, which we noticed had a letterbox at it, according to the website that is, and asked the bartender if he had a letterbox in the pub. He stated that he keeps it outside and proceeded to send us to the wall in front of the pub. We get there to find a red postal mailbox embedded in the wall. Deb and I just had to laugh at this and decided not to go back and inquire further, due to further embarrassing ourselves. Our next day of letterboxing brought us to Vixen Tor, Feather Tor, and Barn Hill. Vixen Tor was unfortunately closed to hiking traffic due to the wishes of the landowner, so we hiked west towards Heckwood Tor and found our first box of the day almost immediately. We kept searching, and when we got to Barn Hill, we looked to the west to find very hazy skies. The one thing that Letterboxer 2002 always told us was that if the skies get hazy and foggy, then a big storm is on the way. We decided to leave immediately since the sky over Tavistock was completely fogged over, and we could actually see the wall of water moving towards us. We got to the car just in time. We decided to spend the rest of our day going to different pubs around the region, since that seemed to be a perfect rainy day activity. We started our next day of letterboxing at Corndon Tor, to where our British letterboxing pals, Chris and Louise, were very lucrative in their hunts for Dartmoor letterboxes. For those of you who don't know Chris and Louise, they're a father-daughter pair from Gosport, England, whom many of us letterboxers met while Louise was doing a term paper on letterboxing for her university work. Many of us took online surveys and were able to meet them when she and her father came to interview some of us. We had a great walk up the side of Corndon Tor, and the sun decided to peek out for us, which really highlighted the green ferns, the grass, the purple heather, and the yellow blossoms on the gorse. We hunted for boxes on Corndon only to find one very obvious large box on the northwest side near the top. We decided to call it a day and find some more little villages to poke through. We knew we'd do better late in the day when we met up with Chris and Louise. As we drove through some very cute towns. Near Corndon Tor, we actually found a stone marker placed for Queen Victoria's Silver Jubilee back in 1862. We continued through Ponsworthy to Widcombe and the Moor, which had a beautiful church and some cute inns and some very cute shops. We even found a box or two there as well. Of course, as avid letterboxers, we're always looking for a good box. We continued on toward Bovey Tracy and found Hay Tor, one of the most popular tours on Dartmoor. What was funny was that there were so many people hiking on Hay Tor that they looked like ants climbing on a piece of fruit. After having ice cream at the ice cream truck, which had a box by the way, we continued on to Bovey Tracy to the pub where the Dartmoor 100 Club has their meetings. Of course, if I had planned our trip better, I would have stayed for a Wednesday night meeting so we could meet some more letterboxers. For those of you who are hoping to get to Dartmoor, definitely find out when the meetings will be held and plan accordingly so you can go out and meet some letterboxers. We headed back to the Plume to meet up with Chris and Louise, who brought us out to some American-style boxes. Finally, some boxes we can find. Louise carved the stamps herself, which was much different than the rest that we had found on Dartmoor. We also headed back to Corndon to find many of the boxes we missed. Unfortunately, we only found a few boxes on our way back up the northeast side due to the high gorse and fern ground cover. Chris and Louise said it gets too overgrown sometimes to find the boxes and that spring is the best time to look, though you'd have to battle the rainstorms to find them. Went back to the Plume to meet up with Andy Wilkes and his son Josh, and the 6 of us swapped some stories. The next day we headed out to South Hessery Tor, which is a smaller tor near the Plume of Feathers. We climbed up to the top to get a great but cloudy view of Princeton. We had a great lunch at the Plume of Feathers consisting of cheese, salad, bread, coleslaw, and spicy reliches. Of course, my favorite was the Gloucester with dill. After lunch, we headed out to Nuns Cross, Fox Tor, and Child's Tomb. About halfway between Nuns Cross and Child's Tomb, Louise and Debbie got tired, so I insisted on going to Child's Tomb by myself. It was a very marshy area, and I had trouble keeping my feet dry in the small islands of grass. Evidently, the local herd of cattle was curious about my heading over to Child's Tomb because they followed me all of the way there. It's very unnerving, to say at the least, having lots of large cows following you. The next day, we left Dartmoor. It was just such a wonderful time. I totally felt at home there, and I would think nothing of buying a little cottage with a thatched roof on the moor and settling down in the low-key environment which makes Dartmoor so fun to visit. I can't wait to go back and see places like Bowerman's Nose, Brent Tor, and Pew Tor. It really is an experience that you will never forget.
The stakeout's in place, looking due north to the entrance of Boston Sports Club at the base of 2 pine trees. So I'm talking to the Lazy Letterboxer. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Tired after a long day of hiking the trails?
Well, it's been a long day for a lazy person.
We first met at the Flamingo Caper in Leominster, right?
Yes, that's right.
And isn't that where you live?
Yes, it is.
Right. Are you going to do another one next year?
Actually, I do have an idea for another one, and it's
different theme?
Definitely a different theme, but Lovey Huffington will be involved once more. So
Great.
Yes, I am planning one.
Great. Well, plan to be there.
Okay.
That was my first. That was my first one, and it was a really, really fun time.
Thank you.
So how did you get started letterboxing?
I read the original article in Smithsonian Magazine, April 1998, and said to my husband, someday we're going to go to England and do this. It sounds so fascinating. Then I was looking to find a place to take my nephews from California swimming when they were out here for a visit in 2001. I clicked on Wendell State Forest, and up popped up Wendell State Forest letterboxes, and we went out and found them the following weekend.
So Google got you to letterboxing by accident.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So you'd read it before, but
yes,
then
but
this
always
brought you
kept
back.
it in my mind that it was something I wanted to do. I had no idea.
Cool.
I had originally checked to see if there were any in the United States and hadn't found any. References to any. So I hadn't checked back.
Right, because it was still so new.
Correct.
That's when it really got started.
Yep.
Okay. So you've been to Dartmoor at least once, I know.
One time,
okay.
Yes.
Are you going to go again?
Yes. Planning to go back.
That's great. Well, it's certainly one of my ambitions to be able to go to Dartmoor sometime. So what kind of differences do you find notable between letterboxing in the U.S. and letterboxing on Dartmoor?
Oh, well, most notably, there's many things. The stamps, for one thing. They usually design their own stamps and have them commercially made. So you never, or very rarely, will you find a hand-carved stamp over there. They seem to take pride in their commercial stamps. And they commented some of ours looked like they had been carved with a spoon.
Well,
Them's fighting words, but anyway, we got over that.
I'm sure they weren't talking about yours.
How come I'm the only one that heard that comment then? And just the way the clues are placed, the triangulation for the clues, they're not clued like our letterboxes are. So they have these huge scavenging areas where you just go and look under every rock and in every little crevice up on the tours. There'll be just a giant tour with all kinds of rocks, and you can walk and walk and walk and just scavenge. So I'd say that's probably two of the biggest differences, and those two I think are huge. It really is different.
And they don't use the internet for their
No, they
clues.
publish their clues. You have to purchase them after you've found 100 letterboxes scavenging. Then you can get the patch and get the privilege.
And you got the patch?
We do have the patch, yes.
And the book?
No, we didn't buy the book.
You didn't?
No. Well, by the time we'd go back, the book would have been updated several times.
Oh, right. So when you go back, maybe you'll get a book.
Perhaps. Or maybe scavenge some more.
Okay. So, Lazy Letterboxer, that's kind of an interesting name. How did you decide on that?
Well, the second gathering I went to was in spring of 2002, and up to that point I didn't have a trail name. And we were sitting at the picnic table at Sleeping Giant in Connecticut, and it's all the trails there was a lot of trails that were rocky and steep, and people were saying, oh, I'm going to go on that one. Oh, I can't wait to go on that one. My favorite letterbox, 5 miles uphill. And I was sitting there thinking, forget it. I wouldn't do that. And suddenly it occurred to me I was the laziest letterboxer there because I was not chiming in for these big war stories. So I said, that's it. I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, I'm the lazy letterboxer. And it stuck.
Great. Well, from what I've seen, you've been anything but lazy in the boxes you've planted and the gathering you hosted.
Well,
Those are a lot of work.
Gotten better. I've been working on it.
So what's the most attractive part of letterboxing for you?
Oh,
Is there any one
think,
part?
Oh boy. I think for my husband and I, it's been a great couple activity, so I'd say that's probably the best thing, because previous to this, he would have liked to go hiking, but I didn't like hiking. Mm-hmm. And now, as long as there's a box at the end of the hike, I'll go almost anywhere.
That's great. So, do you still count your finds when you're letterboxing?
No,
you giving that
I
up?
stopped around 800.
Uh-huh.
Just decided I
had
had enough with counting.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
You didn't want the P1000 patch?
No, I think I could probably claim it, but...
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
You are welcome. It was
Been a
nice
pleasure
chatting
talking to
with you.
All right. Thanks. At the beginning of this podcast, you heard Headphones by Fluid, which is available at magnatune.com. The instrumental music used in this podcast is Hiking the Shining Path by Warren Butler from his album Cultivation of Grace.